Paramedics, firefighters, cops. What is the weirdest thing you've come across during a call? Friend who used to be an EMT responded to a call concerned a large woman with diabetes. He ended up becoming friends with her. Dude is seriously the most charismatic mother you'll ever meet. Later down the line, she had to get an above the knee amputation. Some time later, he came to visit her in the hospital. She was in a wheelchair. He was sitting in his own chair. She starts putting the moves on him, punctuated by rubbing her stump against his leg. Needless to say, they don't keep in touch. Rubbing her stump against his leg. I won't lie, that's kind of adorable. My father told me this story. He was talking to the firefighter chief. Apparently a naked black man broke into the firehouse, got into a battalion chief's office, and began smearing his poop on the walls. When the battalion chief got there, apparently he screamed like a little girl. Guy reached out the window and hit the electric wires with a curtain rod. No idea why someone would do this. When you take a big shock like that, there is an entrance wound where you make contact, and an exit wound where the charge returns to earth. Usually this is on the patient's feet, unless of course, in leaning out the window your junk was in contact with the windowsill. TLDR. Guy manages to burn his junk off completing a circuit. I used to work with a guy who was an EMT in Milwaukee, WI, and said that the stupidest call he got was for a guy who had a big zit on his face. The guy requested to be hauled out by gurney. Sounds about right. I had someone come in by ambulance last week because her foot had been hurting for about 20 minutes. For trauma or injury, was just sitting on the couch and her foot was, in her words, just a little sore, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't broken. Searching for a man's nose sliced off by his visor on his motorcycle helmet on first shift. I can't explain the physics, but his nose was sliced, not ground off on the road. With the amount of blood on the helmet visor, we assumed it was the sharp edge. A man with compound fracture of his femur that pieced his car door and pinned him to it. Yes, he went to the hospital with the interior part of the door still attached. A guy who stuck a shotgun in his mouth and blew off his head and good portion of the car roof he was sitting in. Old Volkswagen Jetta, now with a sunroof. A steel door leading to a marijuana grow up in a house that had a pit dug in the floor on the other side with landscape beams with spikes in them as a trap. Basically, they had it set up so if you kicked in the door and rushed in to rip them off, you would fall in the pit as soon as you rushed in, as you would not expect it. Vietnamese punji pit style. This is gonna get buried, but oh well. Not my story, but my brother-in-law's. So he and his two preceptors were dispatched to a house in the downtown of a pretty big city. Upon arrival, they were told by the mother of the person in need of help that her 13-year-old son's groin was bleeding. What had happened? The kid thought it would be a good idea to masturbate into a beer bottle. After trying for about 10 minutes to get the beer bottle off, he thought the best solution would be to break it on the wall. This obviously caused a whole lot of lacerations along his dong. The paramedics had him go into the ambulance. Unfortunately for the kid, my brother-in-law's preceptors were very good looking and ex-Hooters girls. The kid started to get an erection and began to bleed everywhere. The worst part of all of this is that it all happened while his parents were hosting a family reunion. My father was a police officer for a major metropolitan police department. He shared many stories with me over the years, but this is the one that popped up in my head. One day he went to a call where a male subject was reported to have been using heroin or some other opiate drug when he became unresponsive. When my dad arrived on the scene, he discovered that the guy's friends had placed ice inside and around his anus. They said they heard it would revive him. 00. I worked for a fire department documenting incidents for training. Was out one night with my co-worker driving around hoping to catch an interesting call when we get flagged down by a homeless guy. He was yelling they throwing bodies from the bridge. We figure it's BS, but we drive around the corner under the freeway overpass and sure enough there are two bodies in the road and a guy up on the bridge yelling that my brother. I jump out and start putting gloves on to check for vitals, and my partner starts to call it in. Being the poor part of town, of course the street sign had been stolen, so he drives off to look at the sign at the other end of the street. leaving me in the middle of the road with 2 bodies and a bunch of homeless people. One guy had injuries incompatible with life, so I left him and went to check on the guy that was still breathing. About that time the police arrive up on the bridge and detain the guy up there. Long story short, the ambulance arrived and transported the one guy. The other guy went home in a body bag. It turns out that the 3 men were driving down the expressway when a fight about drugs broke out and they swerved into the guardrail, got out of the car and started throwing each other over the side. 911 dispatcher here. So while I hear a lot of calls, I don't actually get to go out and see it. Regardless, we get a lot of stories that come back to our center, so we usually get closure on calls we're interested in following. Anyway, reading all these stories reminds of one call we had regarding a woman who was drunk and wanted to kill herself after her boyfriend broke up with her. She left the bar she was at and was lying in the middle of a downtown road around 3 o'clock or 4 am, hoping to be hit by a car and killed. Ordinarily the road is pretty busy, but at that hour there's obviously not a whole lot of traffic on it. She lay down in the eastbound lane, and after sitting for a few minutes without being hit, she decided to try her luck in the westbound. All the while her friend was screaming and pleading, trying to get the woman to come out of the road before she got herself killed. Sure enough, we eventually got the call that she had been hit by a car and sent EMS and a fire department out. We were later told that when the paramedics arrived, they had to get together to decide how they were going to transport her. She had laid spread eagle on the road, I think, and the result was that she was partially torn straight up the middle. One of her legs, rather than extending down from her torso, was instead nearly shorn off. The top of the thigh was off to the side, near her hip, and her leg extended upward past her head. I'm not sure what the medics wound up doing, but I think she was transported, maybe via helicopter. This passed a year or 2 ago, so I'm fuzzy on the details, but it's one of a few calls that made me both want to be on the road and also warned me to stay on the phones. My dad was a city cop for 27 years. 2 stories stick out in my mind. 1. Parents of a kid that had been neglected until it died decided instead of reporting the death decided to catch the first bus out of town. Instead of properly and respectfully handling the remains, stuffed the baby into a garbage bag and left it in a locker at the bus depot. It wasn't noticed until some time later when the stench was permeating the place that the cops, my dad of course getting the call, that the poor kid was discovered. My sister would have been around the same age at the time. Still remember my dad always going to check on her as she slept after that call, just to make sure everything was okay. 2. Dad was called out to a motorcycle accident, pretty bad one from what I recall, and the rider, though immobilized, was still speech responsive. Dad was comforting him until the EMTs arrived. Once the paramedics were there, they took the guy's helmet off to assess the damage. Apparently the helmet had not done its job and the guy's head split in 2 and he died mid-sentence talking to my dad. From what I understand, his skull had cracked and the brain was starting to swell. When the helmet was removed, it forced its way out and partially split the scalp. How my dad came out of all those bulls calls without going nuts I don't know, but he has to be one of the toughest him out there. I was glad when he decided to pull the pin and retire. Enough was enough already. My mom was relieved too. This didn't happen to me, but my dad and his old partner can be seen chasing a rooster on an intro for the show Cops. I guess there's more footage from that call on a blooper episode, but I've never seen it. Not sure what the charges were. Australian Coast Guard got called out to a boat that had broken down due to a flat battery. They were in no immediate danger, so we told them to drop the anchor and wait for us. We took about 45 minutes to get there. They got bored. As we discovered when we arrived, the man comes, 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 the man. My aunt used to drive an ambulance. One of the calls they had was about a car that drove under a semi-trailer. They pulled up to see this car and the whole top of it shredded. They thought the guy was dead. They were expecting to see his head in the back seat when they pulled it out. They were all standing around talking about what to do when they heard someone calling from under the trailer. Turns out the guy had enough reaction time to put his seat back. Not me, but a friend. He was driving down the highway and got to an accident. It had just happened. Police EMT etc weren't there yet and everyone was just driving around it to keep going to work. So my friend, let's call him Paul, thinks that it's bulls that no one is helping these people. So he pulls over even though he was just a coal miner. The two people in one car are obviously dead, so he runs over to the other car. He managed to pull the driver out of the burning car, but looked at the passenger and apparently they had been decapitated. Head about 40 feet outside the car, went into the back seat where a woman kept saying she couldn't feel her legs. Turns out she had been cut in half by whatever had decapitated the passenger. All in all, he only saved one person, but they would have been burned alive otherwise. Paul quit his job and went to university later that year to be a nurse. Graduated 2 years ago and is saving lives all the time. Back when I was an EMT, we had a call for man down chest pains on this hot humid day. I arrive and this lady found her husband unconscious in the garage. No heartbeat or breathing. So we start CPR. Well, as I'm bagging this guy and the cop is doing compressions, we start looking around a bit and notice there were a lot of pee magazines strewn about the area. No doubt, this guy clocked out while spanking the monkey. This one's from a nurse. I did 1 day's work as a standardized patient for a nursing college. It's where they hire some actors for the nursing exams and give you a set list of symptoms and things to say. The person grading these students is a nurse. Being an actor and knowing nothing about nursing, I asked this dude as many questions as I could. Each student had an 8-minute exam. No more, no less. Between one of those 8 minutes, I asked what was the strangest thing you'd ever seen. He answers toilet brush in the butt. I chuckle and a student comes in. I have to wait 8 minutes to ask, without a word before. Business end up. Yes, business end up. My mother is a retired emergency room nurse. She has a lot of work stories, but the best is the time a teenage couple needed medical help to be separated. The girlfriend had braces or a retainer wire or something on the backs of her teeth, and the boyfriend was uncircumcised. Some skin got caught in the braces. The teenagers didn't have their health cards with them, and card us Canadians have to show every time we go to the doctor or hospital in order to get our delicious free healthcare. Getting the card replaced is a bureaucratic pain in the foreskin. So most parents hold onto their kids' cards. The hospital had to call their parents to bring in their cards. So, busted. The boyfriend received an emergency circumcision. The girlfriend presumably received some dental floss. TLDR. Chewy BJ. I'm a police officer, and one day I got a call from a woman who hadn't heard from her best friend for several days after calling and banging on her front door. The unheard from friend was a known prescription drug user in her 40s, so right away we assumed the worst. My partner and I knocked on her door, and from inside we actually heard someone moving around. We started calling her name, and from inside we could hear her calling for help. I kicked the door in, and the first thing that hit us was the smell. We followed her voice down a hallway, past her bathroom, and into her bedroom where she, and everything we had passed on the way, was covered in her own crap. She had attempted to detox herself cold turkey, and at some point decided to smear her crap all over her apartment and herself. She was, obviously, in need of medical treatment, and at that point she had to go to the hospital for a mandatory mental health evaluation. We offered her to go with the ambulance crew, and she refused to go. We explained that she had to go, and again she refused. The ambulance crew tried to sweet talk her into going, but she started to become fiscally confrontational with everyone. My partner and I had to wrestle her to the ground to get her into handcuffs. We got her into the ambulance and my partner proceeded to throw up, and a state trooper had to help rip my uniform off of me before I did the same, as we were now both covered in her crap too. Vehicle pursuit that was headed up I-49. Anyway, we spike the tires of the truck and the drive bails. Well, the driver was dressed up like a giant yellow chicken. I swear almost identical to the Family Guy one. I take off after the giant chicken and easily catch up to him. Not really easy for the dude to run wearing the giant chicken claw feet. As I get close he turns around and screams, "King Kong ain't got crap on," right as I tackle him. Few minutes later he's in handcuffs, but holy heck, that DAS cam footage is amazing. Not so weird, but related story. A relative told me. Woman came in with excruciating abdominal pain. This is in a small town, and I mean small, so the hospital has no theater surgery, just a basic style setup. They'd do a scan and discover the woman was pregnant, but the pregnancy was ectopic and had burst in her fallopian tube. She was bleeding out internally, and there was almost nothing they could do other than give her blood transfusions until such a time as the emergency helicopter from the nearest city hospital could get her and take her to their hospital for treatment. Only problem was, she was a Mormon. No, she wasn't. She was a Jehovah's Witness sorry, and couldn't take a blood transfusion. Or wouldn't, if you'd prefer. So, the team, at a loss of what else they can do, brainstorms for a method to keep this woman alive for the next hour, maybe longer, until she can get the surgery she needs. They ended up essentially sticking a tube into her abdomen at the bleed site, putting a needle in her arm, and connecting the two, so the blood she was losing was being pumped straight back into her bloodstream. She survived, but the baby was indeed lost. I suppose that's a clever way to find a loophole in her religion. A friend's father was a paramedic and he'd tell us his more interesting stories from time to time. Once he was called to the scene of a domestic assault to treat some injuries, and I guess the cops were chuckling at the guy when he showed up. When he asked what had happened, the cops told him to ask the guy. So the guy is clearly bleeding from his head and my friend's dad asks him what his deal is. B hit me with a smooth. Excuse me? B hit me with a smooth. A what? You know, smooth clothes wit. Turns out it's what he called a clothes iron. I'm a firefighter paramedic and I work in an area that has some low income housing. We got a call one night at about 3 AM for a woman having difficulty breathing. We arrived at the apartment complex, which could double for the buildings in the opening of the old show Good Times, and head up to the 7th floor. When we get to the apartment we can hear this cackling laughter coming from inside. We identified ourselves and the woman told us to come in. Now many residents of these apartments are really poor and they have few items of furniture, sometimes just a mattress on the floor of a 2-bedroom apartment and that's it. So we opened the door and of course the apartment has no lights at all, but the light from the hallway makes the living area easy to see. In the middle of the living area is a 300-pound woman sitting on a giant shoe-shaped chair, like a high heel shoe with leopard print. Nothing else visible in the room, and the woman is just laughing. We ask what's going on and the laughing woman states she can't breathe at all and hasn't taken a breath all day. But mind you, we can see her breathing and laughing. She is able to speak to us. So my partner pulls out a flashlight and we go to assess the woman. I start my exam, taking vitals while my partner holds the light. He heard something off to our side in an unlit part of the room and panned the light over and let out a crap. In the unlit corner of the room was another very large woman lying on a single mattress on the floor, eating what looked like roast beef out of a bowl with her bare hands. The mattress woman says to us that be lying she high as frick. 10 seconds after she says this to us, a door in the unlit apartment opens, and a man screams, "I told you to shut the frick up," and the unseen door slams shut. While all this is going on, the woman on the shoe chair is just laughing uncontrollably. My partner and I both wanted to get the heck out of there ASAP. The laughing woman was breathing fine and her vitals were good and she stated she didn't call us anyway. We grab our bag and monitor and make a beeline for the exit. We pass the kitchen and my partner shine the light in there as we pass. At the sink was a kid, looked to be about 12, washing dishes in the complete darkness of the apartment. We made the hallway shut the door after us and got back to our truck in record time. We called Child Protective the next day for a check safety for the kid. To this day I think I walked into a Twilight Zone episode. My buddy is a firefighter medic and I am always prodding him for awesome stories. The best one I've heard is that they went on a call for a woman having chest pain. They arrive on scene and find an incredibly obese woman. All her vitals seem fine but she of complaining of excruciating pain. The prepper for the ambulance and on the way to the hospital they find the source of the pain. A fork was lodged in her fat rolls, stabbing her in the chest. Literal chest pain. TLDR. Woman complaining of chest pain has a fork stuck in fat rolls. In my service area we have a frequent flyer that, at one point, had a colostomy bag. The man was homeless, and on several agonizingly disgusting occasions we would be called to transport this man to the ER to have his colostomy bag reattached to his stoma. That's all fine and dandy. However, the reason he needs it reattached is because he'd charge other men to use his stoma sexually. Shudder. I'm late to the part here but I have a pretty good one I think. 23.5 hours into a tour with Ems, we get toned out for a female having severe lower abdominal pain, and we're thinking great, we're about to get off and we're taking a gushing gash syndrome or Midol call. We get there and there stands a ridiculously attractive 23-year-old female. I'm a straight female and I still thought that, in the doorway, but she's standing a little funny. She asks us to come in. My partner starts doing some vital checks as I'm talking to her. She starts to explain to me how she had been doing some experimenting with a potato rectally and had not been able to pass it for 4 or 5 days. I stopped. I couldn't do a goddamn thing. I asked her if she wanted to walk to the truck or if she would like a stretcher. Stretcher it was. Prone. Face down. Spud filled butt up. We get her loaded up. Don't give much detail to our incoming. Well, I pop into the cabin and showed my partner exactly how the frick do I document potato stuck in butt on here. I thought he was going to have a stroke trying not to bust up laughing. We get to the receiving hospital. I inform them of what they're handling. The response I got was, "You're fricking with me." Frick you. You're fricking with me. From what we heard after, the extraction was pretty crazy nasty, but every now and then when I go to cook with potatoes it reminds me of that. Ole Dumby butt spuds. I was working at a government location in Nevada in early 2000s when the fire alarm went off in our building. We all had to evacuate and stand in the cold, so I sweet talked the cute EMT to let me sit in her ambulance for warmth. In order to stay as long as I could, I asked her about her job. Her craziest story was when she worked in an ER and a female patient came in with a gunshot wound. Her angry boyfriend shot her while they were in a car. The .32 or .22 round was fired through the soft tissue of the hip, from right to left, traversing the body. I cringed and asked the obvious, and she confirmed the shot went directly through the clitoris. I asked how you treat something like that. She said to just irrigate and keep it clean. Most men can't find it. This guy hits a bullseye. I am a lieutenant at our local fire department. One night we went to a EMS call in the local hood. It was this 40-ish YO white woman, about 250 pounds. She was having chest pain, and in North Carolina it is protocol to get a 12 lead EKG, which involves lifting up her shirt to put stickers on her chest for an accurate picture of her heart. So me and my crew start assessing her and one of the new guys lifts up her shirt and there in the middle of her chest was the hugest black dong tattoo ever with balls and hair. The new guy stared for a moment in shock and the woman said, "Honey, that is my man and his dong is mighty. I wanted to see it every chance I got." I work in a rural area and one of the other crews got a call where they walked in to find this lady and a sunbanned stuck butt to butt. Apparently she takes doggy style to the next level all the time and this be time when the dog went to dismount he got stuck somehow. Word got out somehow and before it was all said and done about 4 other fire departments showed up just to see this. Do you know how many whole giant pickles you can fit into a vagina before you would need to call an EMT for help getting them out? 7. My dad, via his friend, an EMT. I was an EMT and got a call for a body recovery. The police already established the person as dead. He'd fallen, probably unconscious due to diabetes, in his apartment during a heatwave. He'd been down and dead for at least 5 days. Did I mention it was during a heatwave? Well, he'd pretty well melted into the carpet. We had to cut the carpet out from around him and kind of fold it into the body bag with him. I had just purchased a new pair of work boots the day before and was all happy to have them. Then I decided that it would be way better to throw them out, along with my uniform. It was a surreal experience. I posted this a few months back but here it goes again. Not a Gino but was an EMT firefighter about 10 years back. Treated a very attractive woman who decided to dump about 4 ounces of Drano into on her vagina to kill the sperm that her date left in her by accident. Just think of an English bulldog who got popped an Alka-Seltzer, got into a Costco-sized jar of mayo and then was punched in the face about 10 times. That's what it resembled. To add to the awkward factor, about a year later I met a very attractive woman at a grocery store. We got her number and met her for drinks. Later that night we ended up at my place making out. As soon as I started taking her shirt off I suddenly remembered that the girl who I had taken out for drinks was the one who previously dumped Drano into her bag. Our night ended abruptly and awkwardly as you can imagine. Responded to a motorcycle accident. Was sent to pick up the debris of the bike that was all over the road. Picked up pieces of fairing, the seat, torn bits of jacket and the helmet. The helmet still had his head in it, with the blood spilling out of the container I had just tipped over. This was the first time I had seen a body ripped to pieces, but I was able to keep it together. When I got back to the station I threw up and the captain sent me off to get wasted. High abundance of medical calls in this thread. One of our fires was at a rather interesting site consisting of 4 1970s-80s campers turned into permanent structures. They also had a tractor on the site, a colourful old school bus, a half-finished home-built water tank and windmill, unique fencing consisting of trees plus wiring, and happened to be way down a marginally accessible old logging road that damaged the fire trucks. To sum it up, one of our mutual aid partners came up to me and asked whether are we some kind of hippie commune? My mom is a paramedic, and I'll never forget this story she told me one night after a 42-hour shift. Early in the morning before she got off, she got a call for her and her partner to head out to this lady's house complaining of chest pains. T-Hay hurried on out to the house and found that the woman was also overweight and could not answer the door, so they walked around back. When they got to the gate there were 2 full-grown wolfhounds barking like mad at them, yet the second they opened the door the dogs ran off to the back of the yard and hid under a bush like they were the ones scared. My mom laughed at that, but they got up behind the house and opened the screen door. My mom's partner John was then attacked by a tiny chihuahua. It bit his shoe and he kind of kicked it back softly to get it off, but it just kept on coming. Mom walked on back into the house and the stench of dog crap was everywhere. Mom nearly threw up, she said, and found the woman. There was another chihuahua slung about her neck like a necklace. 2 more in her lap. When my mom lifted up her arm to take her blood pressure, another chihuahua popped out from her armpit. 5 minutes later, 10 more chihuahua popped out from her body and from the chair and were circling my mom and John biting their shoes. Those little dogs actually bite really hard. My grandpa is a fireman who sometimes takes calls to car accidents. This one day a group of college kids were driving drunk through the country roads and hit a guardrail and it split the car in 2. My grandpa said that as he was pulling the bodies out he thought one of their heads was going to fall off. My mother's an emergency trauma nurse, but this happened when she was off work. Her and dad were just driving along when the traffic slowed down and became super blocked up. Turned out a truck had slammed on its brakes and a sheet of glass it was carrying flew off and sliced into another car, taking the driver's head off. She had to help out at the scene, I think. Gruesome crap. I was a volunteer in a small town fire brigade. One night at 3 or so in the morning my pager goes off with the distinct and unusual message of MVA, motor vehicle accident, car versus cow. I've never been so eager to get out of bed that early. I raced to the station in time to catch the second unit out, and sure enough on this back stretch of country road, 2 elderly ladies and made an absolute mess of a cow that had escaped its paddock and was standing directly in their lane. There was bits of cow and car everywhere. The ladies were totally fine. The car was written off and the cow sadly did not walk it off. The smell is what I remember more than anything. The cow released everything it had on board across the road. I wish I had taken a photo. I am ashamed. I had just received my EMT and was out on a call with an experienced paramedic when we got a call to go to an apartment. He recognized the address and said I should prepare myself. When we got there, the apartment had a family living there, a man, a woman and 2 girls maybe 15ish. The girls were acting all weird and the place smelled like crap. As I looked around trying to figure out what was up, I realized that the dad, who was sitting in a leather recliner, was essentially incapacitated. I just don't remember the details anymore, nor why we were on the call in the first place. But the guy had crap all over the recliner over the years and there he stayed. When we left, the paramedic explained that he was a mean guy and would have his daughters give him blowjobs while he sat in that chair. I called bulls, but he assured me that it was true. The girls had confided in him while they were on a call there once. He is what we call a frequent flyer. I asked why he had not called social services and he said they had called multiple times, but every time the whole thing would get denied or covered up and there was nothing anyone could do. It just makes me sick and still does. Got called out to a house to do a well-being check on someone's family member. We get to the house with PD and they enter first. We follow in with the stretcher and walked into one of the grossest scenes I've ever seen in my life. Every surface in the house was covered with bottles, buckets of this guy's pee and crap. The guy was very much alive and very much covered in own crap. We ended up having to take him to the hospital, obviously, and that's the last I ever heard of it. We spent an hour cleaning the back of the ambulance at the hospital, but kept finding this guy's crap in the back for weeks. My friend is an EMT and loves to tell this story. Once, while working in the Southwest, he responded to a call that took him at least 20 minutes into the desert. They came up to the house and found a rather obese black man laying dead on his porch with a woman who was rather large as well standing over him with her hands on her hips looking pee off. The EMTs, as in all three of them, picked this guy up in the gurney and were bringing him to the ambulance when the woman called out after them. I told that fat motherfucker not to eat no 4 chili cheese dogs. The EMTs, my friend included, almost tipped the gurney over laughing. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.